Yes, as Professor Wilson said, I'm a Ukrainian journalist, activist, and entrepreneur. Well, I'm activist only to a certain extent. I'm involved in a number of civil society initiatives. The recent one is We Europeans movement, which is a youth movement mostly in cyberspace where we fight for European integration of Ukraine, despite the fact we have very cold phase of relationship between the current Ukrainian government and the European Union. So today I will talk about the country where people power won and what happened afterwards that made the society so frustrated and so withdrawn from politics. Orange Revolution was a big post-electoral uprising between 2004 and 2005 when millions of Ukrainians were standing in the streets of Kiev and some other major cities because they just could not accept that the presidential election was rigged and that they had to accept the candidate who won the election, who was supported by the outgoing president and by the Russians. And he also had a serious image problem because unlike Mr. Bieletsky, who was talking to us yesterday about his times in prison for political and civic activism, Yanukovych was in prison for violent crime at least twice. On the other hand, we had an opposition candidate who was quite attractive to people. He was soft, democratic, and he was also poisoned during presidential campaign, which made him a martyr and a victim, so people supported him even more. However, after Orange Revolution, people became very dissatisfied. Yes, we had free election after Orange Revolution, free media, freedom of assembly, but the rest of substantial promises of Orange leadership were not delivered. For instance, there was no rule of law, no fight with crime, with corruption, no economic reforms, no independent judiciary, and NATO and EU integration essentially did not occur. Not only because of bad leadership of Ukrainian politicians, but also because Europe and NATO were not really stretching their hand to Ukraine after Orange Revolution. And civil society was largely demobilized after Orange Revolution, so they did not really have any impact on what was going on in society. So many attribute this failure to the war between the Orange leaders, between Tymoshenko and Yushchenko. Yulia Tymoshenko was an Orange leader who became a prime minister, and Yushchenko became president, and they were united for the revolution. But after the revolution, when they became powerful and policymakers, they became bitter enemies. And this animosity was bitter to the extent that when Yushchenko was preparing to leave his post as a president in 2010, because he only got 5% of votes from the population, comparing to 55 that he got after Orange Revolution. He endorsed not his former ally Tymoshenko, but his enemy Viktor Yushchenko, Yanukovych, the anti-hero of Orange Revolution. And Viktor Yanukovych in 2010, believe it or not, became Ukrainian president. And Tymoshenko lost in the runoff, and Yanukovych, as you can imagine, became a very authoritarian leader because he was not democratic to begin with. But many people say that had he won in 2004 and Orange Revolution did not occur, he would be much worse than he is today. So at least Orange Revolution was not in vain from this point of view. Because after Yanukovych came to power, yeah.
I'm not able to quite follow because the names are hard for me to register. So is this the guy who was poisoned before?
No. This is the bad guy who was in prison. the bad guy of Orange Revolution who was
who had the bad image.
Yes.
And he became president.
Exactly. So imagine, it's like everything went back to zero after 5 years
So we expect pro-Mubarak to come back after...
Exactly.
It's like, yeah, comparable if you had Mubarak back in 5 years.
Which almost happened. Not Mubarak, but Mubarak. Sorry for the interruption.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, because you see, the names, their names are similar, Yushchenko and Yanukovych, and you heard me myself confuse them, being a Ukrainian. So, you know, yeah, feel free to stop if you don't understand something. So he consolidated power very fast. He changed constitution just within several months in office without any consultation with Ukrainian public. He basically controls all the branches of government, and he became like a real Ukrainian Tsar. But people don't really take this Tsar seriously, as you see from this slide. And you can guess what happened to Tymoshenko if such guy is in power. Of course, she is either dead or in prison. She's in prison for 7 years, allegedly for exceeding her powers, signing the gas deal with Russia in 2009, which imposed very high prices of Russian gas to Ukraine that Ukrainians are buying. And moreover, she got sick in prison. She's being visited by European leaders. And she also claims that she was beaten in prison. And after Tymoshenko emailed these photographs to Hillary Clinton and Angela Merkel, Ukrainian government under Yanukovych found itself under international isolation to a large extent. So if the West is protecting Tymoshenko, are Ukrainian people protecting her? Not really, because there are only small protests in her support, but largely people believe that she is corrupt and that all politicians are corrupt and they all deserve to be in jail, and she's just the first one to go. Generally, the theme of corruption is very, right now, important for Ukrainian society because journalists are doing a lot of investigations. And for example, one of the campaigns that Stop Censorship movement of journalism is doing, and I'm also part of this movement, is that they come to the presidential residence every year to tell him about corruption. This year they made a map of corruption based on their investigations, telling him where is corruption in Kiev. And why do they come to his residence? Because his own residence is the biggest symbol of corruption. It is the size of the land that he acquired is comparable to Monaco or to Hyde Park. He has beautiful palaces there.
Is this presidential?
Yes.
It's like owned by the state?
No, it's owned by him now. It used to be state-owned, official state-owned residence. Yes, right now it's his property. Yeah, he just got the land, and there was some more modest building from Soviet era, but he now built his own style of building that he likes. You see the interiors resemble very much Nicolae Ceausescu, former Romanian dictator style of this pompous luxury. And a lot of Ukrainians live in the Soviet construction that doesn't look as attractive, of course, as presidential administration. Generally, president is not the only corrupt person in Ukraine, and he is just on the top of a very corrupt class of state elite, state officials that are not only that they are corrupt, they also are people above the law. They can commit crimes, they can kill people on the road, they can kill people not in the road, but in some other adventures that they have, and they are not being prosecuted for that, unfortunately. And there is a very serious outrage in society about this. Also, there is a lot of attention right now in Ukrainian society to the issue of police abuse, to the courts that are not independent, and penitentiary system became like the star topic for Ukrainians because so many officials are now in prison after Yanukovych came to power. Not just Tymoshenko, but around 20 other orange former officials are in prison. And so when people are visiting them, they are seeing that it turns out that our prisons don't look like European prisons, They look like Soviet scary prisons where no human rights are abused, respected, and people are being killed in police precincts just because they were detained by police and just did not have good communication with the policemen. A new tendency, which is very promising right now, is that people are discussing what to do. And there are a lot of political talk shows that are not really free, but people are, as an alternative, people are having political saloons, which is new for Ukraine, when different civil society activists and journalists meet not in Kyiv, which is important, but also in other cities of Ukraine and small towns to discuss what to do in the situation when there are no good leaders, there is no good opposition, there is no good government, and all these terrible things going on, corruption and crime. And very often, those discussions end up with one conclusion, with comparison between two revolutions, between Rose Revolution in Georgia, which happened 1 year before Ukrainian Orange Revolution, and the Orange Revolution. In Georgia, the result of the revolution was quite the opposite. There is no freedom of the media and no free political competition. But Georgian leadership managed to fight corruption, fight crime, and to have some economic reforms. So right now, Ukrainians call for Georgian president to step down from his post and to come to Ukraine to take over. Seriously. I mean, this is whoever from the new politicians or activists have support of the Georgian president will win a lot of votes in Ukraine. And so people do protest pretty actively, but most of those protests are not political. They are socio-economic bread and butter protests. When people are simply protesting for some issues of their survival, like taxes that are too high or pensions that are too low. There are, of course, also ideological, political, and human rights protests. And also, another important aspect is that people don't protest against central government in their majority, but against local governments. They try to resolve problems where they live, so they go to protest to the city councils. Not against their regime in general, which is undemocratic, because they care more about their survival than democracy at this point. And also, they don't unite when they protest. Each separate category of people of civil society has their own problems, like students, like doctors, small and medium businesses, Chernobyl and Afghan veterans, pensioners, and they all protest basically separately, without little cooperation. So is there anything innovative about Ukrainian protest? You see, we have iPhones, so we can be innovative right now in Ukraine. Deleting Yanukovych. The current trends that I observe is that the protest became very creative to actually grab the media attention. You need to stage some very impressive street theater performance, or you can be confrontational, like most socioeconomic protests, which show the despair when people are going on hunger strikes, or people are just blocking the rail tracks. Here are some examples I found for you of recent creative protests. You can bring, your domestic animal to the parliament, or this is an important symbol of Ukrainian resistance, the golden toilet. I tell you why. It's a bit puzzling. It's because the constructions workers who were working inside the Yanukovych palaces when he was constructing them took some cell photos that were published by journalists. Those photos reveal that Yanukovych loves when everything in his bathroom is made of gold or covered by gold. So this is why Ukrainians, right now you see golden toilet and it has letter Ya, Yanukovych. They just say that this is, everything will be just like your toilet, they say. This is a very creative protest. Well, they also can bury the coughing of party in the party of the regions, which is the governing party, Yanukovych party, and it is indeed, going underwater. It's losing support dramatically. It only has 1/3 of what it used to have before Yanukovych came to power. Or staging some puppet shows where he is Putin's puppet, which he's not. Anyway. And some confrontational protests. Like I said, the people who protested against tax code last year, it was very large protest. People compared it to Orange Revolution even. But it didn't have much of political agenda. It was people were protesting against high taxes, and the taxes were cut as a result. Or this is a very famous protest actually from the constituency of Yanukovych Donbass, when pensioners brought their shovels and pitchforks to this protest to express their dissatisfaction. And it's a very important and resonating image for Ukrainians, because there is a lot of speculation in society that the next revolution in Ukraine will be not like Orange Revolution, but it will be like a pitchfork revolution, when people will just take these things and go to attack the government. So, but the champions of media attention is when you combine being confrontational and being creative. Like a student from my alma mater from Ukraine, just several months ago hit Ukrainian Minister of Education with a bunch of flowers into the face, in a very important conference, and everyone saw it. Or an activist installed the monument to Stalin that is being, because they are against glorifying him as the savior of Ukraine in the Second World War, because he was also a tyrant of Ukraine who killed millions of Ukrainians. This activist is very famous in Ukraine for frying eggs on eternal flame of the World War II memorial. She was actually in prison for that for 3 months, because it's like desecrating the tomb, because people are buried there. Well, her motivation for doing that was because she is against communist past. And she sees this as a memorial to totalitarian regime, she claims. But civil society was actually defending her, and she was released after 3 months in prison, unlike Pussy Riot in Russia. But of course, the most visible activists in Ukraine today are our topless girls famine. I don't know if you ever heard of them. Ivan probably heard. I see he's liking them on Facebook. Yes?
The only thing we heard about, nothing, none of the...
Yeah, so, okay, you see, there is a reason. There is a reason. They are topless and they are protesting very often. So they have a network of around 300 activists around Ukraine, with maybe 20 girls that are actively protesting. This is the most recent protest. As you know, Ukraine is hosting, together with Poland, European Soccer Championship, and they are protesting against it because they say it attracts sex tourists to Ukraine. So they have this fuck Euro message, and they even managed to damage the Euro Cup during the protest, because one of the activists grabbed it and dropped it on the floor. Yeah, they are very kind of, confrontational, as you see. But they also protest against Yanukovych, demanding impeach Yanukovych, against Ukrainian Secret Service, demanding freedom of assembly. Moreover, you probably heard that they are protesting not only in Ukraine, because they are going abroad to protest. They travel to Russia. They did it several times to protest against Putin and against Russian church, against Russian gas company Gazprom. They traveled even to Belarus to protest against last dictator in Europe, Lukashenko, and demanding to free political prisoners right in front of Belarusian KGB. In Poland, they went to protest against Euro. In Italy, to protest against Berlusconi. In Turkey, violence against women. In France, guess what? About Islam oppression of women. They even went to Switzerland to support their anti-globalist agenda and protest against those. So this series of pictures probably may make you think what's really the agenda of our main protesters, which is exactly the question why civil society in Ukraine and society in general is divided about them. Like 50% really respect them and say that such people are very good to have in society because they really test the limits of freedom. And they also show good example to other activists who are less radical to be less afraid to protest. The other half of people say that they are disgrace to Ukraine, and that, for example, when they are protesting against sex tourism and some foreign man enters, in Google Ukraine and sees them, will he think that Ukraine is a good place for sex tourism or vice versa? This type of considerations. We can talk about this. This is an open debate. There are also a lot of messages in the society on every corner which show disrespect to the president and to the regime, making fun of him, funny T-shirts, spoiling billboards, and again, this famous symbol of toilet and Ukrainian president being inside it. There are also some protests in the support of Ukrainian government. Usually people would come from Western Ukraine to Kiev to protest, but it's not a secret that, of course, they are being paid to protest. And they are being paid to protest not only when they protest for the government, but also for any other political party, even if the party is in opposition. In Ukraine, nobody protests for free right now if it's the protest for political party. So you are paid like $20 a day to stay one day in the street, or you are given this nice gifts of, package of buckwheat sugar and sunflower oil. This is actually, this is the recent picture what at this moment as we speak, Party of the Regions is distributing to its voters in the east of Ukraine, where most impoverished population actually live. A few words about cyber activism. We have a lot of people online. You see, this is the granny who decided to hack the pension fund. This is actually the picture, I think, from Russia, but anyway, it's the same thing in Ukraine. People are very excited about cyber activism, but people are not doing any disruptive. People are just, expressing anger, and they are also, using a lot of humor and just talking about all this terrible reality that they are seeing, but they are not being subversive. The only thing that happened in Ukrainian cyberspace was the war between Ukrainian netizens when they actually partnered with Ukrainian Anonymous. This cyber outrage was caused by the attempt of the government to close the biggest pirate website of Ukraine, which is in the top 25 pirate websites in the world. You can download free movie, free music, free software. And when the government closed it down, Ukrainian netizens opened this website called Revenge for XUR. And you see the list of these websites. These are practically all government websites. They were down for the whole week. And after that, the government gave back the website. It is there as we speak. So this was, the real revolution when people power won again. But it didn't win again. It didn't win over some political cause, but a cause that we can also debate with you about. I'm wondering what you think about that. And regime, of course, is much more repressive against those who protest than it used to be before in Ukraine. There are much more repressions, like arrests, and a lot of police at the protests when police just comes and blocks the street, and it's really difficult to conduct a protest under such circumstances. There is also a new tendency when some people informally dressed, you don't know who they are, would approach the activists and start telling them some scary things, threatening their families, themselves with physical violence. And I don't know who these people are. Are they criminals? Are they police people? Are they Secret Service people? Are they people from the street? It's very, very vague. So this repression is mostly used against, anti-government, ideological, and political protests. And the majority of other protests, the socio-economic protests, usually are not being repressed they achieve some small victories. There are concessions. Like I mentioned before, the tax code was amended after this big protest last year. Some laws are being reversed, some regulations are being reversed, and then activists are being released if there is a protest for that, or salaries are being paid. This is a big victory, which is a basic right for normal countries. So people see that they can achieve realistic goals, if these goals are not, very abstract, but very concrete. So I would conclude with saying that there is right now very, very high protest mood in Ukrainian society. According to sociological polls, I saw several recent polls. It's pretty impressive. Both orange western part of Ukraine and eastern part of Ukraine are right now pretty much anti-government. But because there is alienation between informal civil society, like people who would go to protest just because they are not happy with life, and formal civil society, they are not really communicating. And because also there is lack of trust between people in general, and this disconnect between civil society and real people out there, who is civil society, who are real people, do real people care about politics? If they care about, digging potatoes in Ukraine, this is like the main activity, how people survive. Because of that, all these reasons, we don't see any massive movements in Ukraine. There are small diffused protests which focus on local problems. And because they are small, of course, they have lack of resources. They cannot arrange a big, impressive campaign. And the civil resistance tends to be not political. There is depoliticization of civil resistance. Thank you very much for your attention. And right now, Professor Tarlow will proceed with telling if People Power is winning in Russia. And then we'll discuss some questions. Thank you. Yeah, and as a transition, we decided to show you a clip from Russia. Where is this clip? It's not, they don't have famine, So that's only maybe starting from 18 seconds when the action really picks up. So this is Moscow this winter.
So I thought this would be a good transition because that's something we'll come back to. But first of all, how extraordinary that you see this spontaneous celebration, or perhaps not so spontaneous, especially as you see the hordes coming in and all in syncopation with each other. A song by an American, a Russian Jew immigrant that is now, sort of gone viral in the square, and I'll come back to it at the end of the presentation to just make some comments about it. Listening to Olena's presentation kind of makes me want to shift what I was going to say a little bit. First of all, I thought it was a marvelous, marvelous presentation, and I love the way that she's been able to digest what's happened over time. The problem with the Russian demonstration and opposition movement, and really it's a movement, it's a protest movement more than an opposition movement still, is that it is in its infancy. Really, it's only been 6 months, really, when you think about it. And it started, I think that you already had an overview of it by Maciek, I think, on Monday. Yes, did you hear something about the movement? So I don't want to go into all the details, but basically it started in September of 2011 when Putin and Medvedev made the announcement that they were going to change places. And they did it with such cynicism and arrogance that not only, within a so-called democratic society were they announcing what was going to happen, but Medvedev even rather sheepishly admitted that this had been planned for a long time. And that just pushed people over the top. There had been, up until this point, kind of an unwritten contract between those who were in opposition in some way or another to the regime, that basically you take care, you will stay out of politics. We were more inclined to be oppositionists. And we know that there's corruption, we know that there's deception, we don't really trust what you're doing, but we know that basically you'll take care of the state and we can continue to flourish and make money, and it becomes an emerging middle class that's well-educated, well-traveled. For the most part, they're technocrats. But this was so cynical that it really started something different. And of course, you had in place a couple of people who were already making use of the devices that would help spread things, like Alexei Navalny, the famous blogger against corruption, who was very savvy in using the internet. There were a host and pockets of other people with whom he worked, but it was basically an issue against Putin, and it was an issue against corruption. And beyond that, it has not really had an agenda or an ideology. And that's a problem. So, it's similar in some ways to what goes on in Ukraine, in that, except that you have specific sides taking place. You've got, in that case, there were two politicians. Here, there's just one politician, and everyone knows that Putin is not going away. There's no one single leader strong enough, organized enough, whatever, to take his place. The other thing that's really endemic for Russia is that there's such a plethora of oppositionists. First of all, you've got the systemic oppositionists, and then you've got the non-systemic oppositionists. And the systemic oppositionists consist of those who work within the framework of official Russia. In other words, these are already they're established parties, whether it be at the Communist Party, nationalist parties, parties on the right, to a certain extent parties on the left. They're within the Duma. They are official, and they kind of know the rules of the game. And up until this point, they were, very much a passive movement, or not even a movement, a passive entity. Then you have the non-systemic ones, and those are outside the legal realm. And these include these civic society groups that might have formed around environmental issues, the taking down of the forest outside of Moscow to build a major highway, things like that. So with this enormously cynical statement that came across, actually you begin to see some movement of these two sides coming together. Now, I don't want to overstate it. It certainly is not to be overstated, but it's different and it's new. And as the specific protests continued, there were a few in 2011, running up to it started, the first major one was in the wake of the parliamentary elections, where it was obvious that there had been a lot of fraud. Then 2012, leading up to Putin's inauguration, and after the inauguration as well, what you see is that they are coming together in ways that did not happen before. So first of all, you have an enormous gathering of people, tens of thousands of people, 100,000 people in December. And you also have some complicity with the systemic group. For instance, Ilya Ponomaryov, who is a member of the Duma, almost single-handedly led a filibuster in the Duma against this new law, I think you've heard about, that imposes enormous taxes, fines up to $9,000 for individuals perceived as contravening the so-called laws for demonstrations. And he actually tried to break that vote, and I guess read every single possible amendment to it until midnight. And of course, it went through ultimately. But the fact that he did this, and he did it within the Duma, that's new. So you are seeing different movements, but we don't really know where it's going because it is so amorphous. So I think one of the things that I would want to say is that if you analyze and sit down and look at what's happening right now, you see a regrouping. They've actually taken a hiatus. They're not going to have any demonstrations until September. And it's a period where you could have a falling off or you could have something sustained. And that's the key, how to keep this sustained. Because with the reality is the structure of the opposition is such that you don't have any one leader, as I mentioned before. There's no one agenda. The only thing they have rallied around is their opposition to Putin. But how useful is that? Because they don't have anyone to replace Putin with. It became a broader, in general, acknowledgement of the rampant corruption and deceit. And now it has actually, managed to manifest itself in calls for more transparency, and perhaps now we will see some actually more specific items on the agenda. But as I said, you've got an amorphous systemic group, an amorphous non-systemic group. They're moving together in kind of a dance, but it's dangerous. It's dangerous to be within the government and be too far out there because you can easily be removed. And it's dangerous for everyone. So what are the kinds of things that the government is doing? They're using various techniques. I mean, we know that they have always used the old, trusted, arrest, detentions. They have, you've probably heard about the recent invasion of the apartments of several major demonstrators, including Navalny. But a very important one was Ksenia Sobchak, because she is someone who is important in two ways. And it's, on the one hand, she is someone who really was perceived as being protected by the government. Her father, Anatoly Sobchak, had been mayor of St. Petersburg under Putin, and he enjoyed tremendous protection from Putin. She is a 30-year-old hipster. She's a socialite. She's a TV star, and she's become an activist. But they went in and took out all of her money in her apartment building, and apparently there was quite a bit, like $1 million worth in rubles and $500,000 worth in dollars. And they claimed that she was evading taxes, and that she had filed taxes that would basically say that she was earning $200,000 a year. Well, these were trumped-up charges. She never did that, and I'm sure we'll see that she will be paying her taxes. But what it means is that they've taken someone who represents something larger, an idea. As a matter of fact, there are analysts who have said that in Russia today, pop culture is an ideology. It's as close to an ideology as they have. Witness what we just saw. This is the kind of thing that brings out hundreds of thousands of people. She has an enormous following. This was very personal as well. Putin felt that she was a threat. Others, not so much a threat to him personally, but the fact that she had this enormous support behind her is tremendous. So the other actually interesting things that they're doing are actually doing, as I started to say, co-opting by using some of the same methods that the opposition uses. For instance, in the latest protest, they staged simultaneously about 500 cultural events, exhibitions, poetry reading, music contests, whatever, just to dilute it. So they're feeling very threatened. They're also making use of the internet. They are starting their own blog, their own Facebook. They are trying to co-opt the same techniques, but they're clumsy, and we'll see whether they're actually effective. And the reality is that people are now beginning to see through all of these things. Let's see how we're doing on time. Probably getting a little bit close to it.
Yeah, maybe.
5 minutes. Okay. Okay. So one of the things I wanted to say is, in terms of what is the prospects for this movement, and what is the likelihood that the government will crack down, is something, honestly, we can't say. No one knows. Everyone hypothesized. But one thing that I think is important to note is that the government is not as unilateral and as strong as one would be led to believe. We talk about a power vertical, with the implication being that all that power is in the hands of Putin, of one person. But in reality, it's a small group of very powerful people, not unlike the Politburo situation in the Soviet period, sitting over a large bureaucracy. And yes, Putin is very important, but he is not irreplaceable. And as a matter of fact, there are theories that what you see going on within the protest movement has more to do with internal struggles within the government. For instance, I don't know if you've been following, but there was this really bizarre incident where the head of the investigative commission was Bastrikin, took to the forest the editor-in-chief of a liberal newspaper who had written articles against corruption, and actually against him as well. And he took me, threatened to kill him, to behead him, and to have a duel. And it went viral. It just, it was so medieval. Then the next day, what normally would have happened is that he wouldn't have said anything, and somehow or other it would have been cleared up, and it would have gone away. But in fact, he apologized, and he said he apologized for being emotional. He made a pact with the editor of the newspaper that, in fact, the newspaper would now be protected for its coverage of the Caucasus. It was really unusual. What I think is going on is that there's a power struggle going on within the Siloviki, the power holders at the very top. These are people from the Interior Ministry, the KGB, who really are sort of playing out their own rivalries, and they're using each other. Putin has been known in the past to be the honest broker. He was sort of the one, because he was the one that everyone trusts. No one trusts each other, but they all trust him. But when you see something like this going on, you know that he actually is losing some control. He is not as monolithic, and people are going off in a kind of a rogue fashion and playing out their own games. So you've got a lot of movement within the government. You've got this incredibly burgeoning sentiment that we're not sure where it's going. But one thing is clear. You have lack of cohesion. You've got pensioners who, for the most part, as long as they're being taken care of, the old-timers, they're really quite passive. But then you've got these younger people who, yes, their lives, ironically, their lives are better off than they were before Putin, but now they are well-educated, well-traveled. They have seen what the world looks like, and they don't like what they're seeing in Russia. So it's a very messy and somewhat volatile situation. I know very well the daughter, a young woman who, I don't want to mention any names, but she is living here, but she has every intention of going back and throwing herself into the movement, because she feels that she, like so many people feel, there will eventually be a change. Whether it happens in another 6 months, unlikely, or 6 years, perhaps that's too long. Something will change because it's not sustainable, and there is this uneasy collaboration going on. So when I wanted to show that to you, was just to show you the power of something that's so outside of government. Government cannot convene this kind of a spontaneous gathering. Although Olena says that perhaps the government is claiming that it was actually pro-Putin, so that's another way that they co-opt, what goes on. So I feel like I've given you a brushstroke because there's so much to say. I don't know how much you know, but I think I'll stop there. Maybe we'll just open it up to questions.